and then talk about the relevance of the evidence. So what does that look like practically speaking? Well, I know that all of our research starts here, where both of them are at the origin. If we were in science class, we talk about that. This is 0 for both axes. We need to ask ourselves when we have a piece of evidence or a source in front of us, how do I know that this is a credible source? And what evidence in this source is the most relevant to my overall claims? So this is where you start with any research that you have. Sometimes if you have a lot of practice with this, you're going to start answering these questions without even realizing it, which is great. So some students jump right to this area where they find the perfect piece of evidence, but the source has unknown credibility. They don't know how good the source is. So that would mean that this would move over here to the left. If the credibility of your source can't be really determined, then you can't use the piece of evidence, even if it says exactly what you want it to say in order to support your overall claim. Similarly, some students will find a really, really credible source, but they pick out the wrong piece of evidence. They don't do the work of reading through all of the source to find the most specific, the most relevant piece of evidence that supports their overall claim. Or sometimes they pick the wrong or non-relevant evidence that disproves their point. Sometimes it's important if you're talking about your counterclaim, but you really want to make sure that you're spending some time with your sources. Just because it's a credible source doesn't mean that every piece of evidence in it is relevant to your overall argument. So our goal today, and really in all of your work, is to make sure that you find credible sources and relevant evidence, because this is the sweet spot. You've chosen a clearly credible source and probably explained to a certain extent what makes it so. And then you've selected the relevant pieces of evidence and provided some commentary. You've used your own words to tell us how it supports the overall claim or argument that you are making. So let's look at an example here. This is from a sample of a student work that was published on College Board on how to address the heroin epidemic of the United States. So this is the citation from the Turkish Journal of Addictions, and here's how it was used in the paper. So we're going to go through a couple of examples like this. So the first thing that I would look at in a student's work is the citation to see, is this a credible source? And I look at the Turkish Journal of Addictions. I look at the fact that it is a journal. I know it's a journal because it has a volume and a number. It was also published on EBSCO. So this is all information that really lends to the credibility of the author. And then I look at the date of October 2018. This paper was written in the spring of 2019. So this is a really, really credible source because it was in a journal that was really recently published. And so I'm going to move this piece of evidence way over on the credibility scale to say, I know that it is credible. But then I'm going to look at how the student uses it in the paper. And I see that the student sets it up and gives us the piece of evidence that says research regarding the nationwide prevalence of substance abuse and heroin use in Turkey has been limited. They're specifically using this piece of evidence to say that to justify why their paper is important. So they're saying that we haven't done a whole lot of study of this yet, and so we need to do more study of it. That makes this a super relevant piece of evidence and moves it way up here. So this is absolutely a green piece of evidence because it's from a credible source and it is relevant to their area of research, and they have even told us a little bit about why. And then what you can see here is they go on to then compare this piece of evidence to another one, and it's just like really, really cool and really well done. Let's look at a second piece. Again, I want to point out we're always starting down here at the origin. We're starting in our minds. This piece of evidence doesn't have credibility just yet. We need to talk about its credibility, and then we need to see how it's relevant to the overall area of research. So this is a source from Addiction. It hints at it being a journal because it has a volume and a number, but I'm not positive about that. It's a little bit later, earlier in time, I guess I should say, 2016. I think it's good. I don't think it's probably as strong as that first one. And so when I move it over on the credibility scale, I'm going to give it a pretty high rating, but not quite as high as that first one. But secondly, when I look at the way that this piece of evidence was used in the paper, how they set up, and they tell me that it was from the University of New South Wales, the National Drug Abuse and Research Center. They define what an overdose is, and then that most heroin overdoses are caused by polydrug toxicity. This is a really, really effective and relevant piece of evidence. And so it jumps all the way up to basically the same level as that first piece of evidence that we looked at. And so the two of these I would put in the green zone if we're going to color code these, because I think that they do a really nice job of setting up the credibility of the source and the relevance of the evidence. Let's look at two other examples from a different paper. This one is on the effects of a vegetarian diet on modern day health issues in the United States. This citation talks about the Eastern Mediterranean University. They told us it's a paper, but I'm not really positive if it's in a journal, if it was just published, could have been just been published on a blog. I'm just not positive in terms of the credibility of the source. It's hinting at it being pretty good, but it's certainly not as strongly set up as that last one does. So you see, I'm going to move it over. It's certainly to the right on the credibility scale, but it's not quite as high as those first two. Then we look at how this source was used in the paper. And I'm going to jump to this last line, that the author states that during one's lifetime, nutrition has an effect on their health status. I want to be honest that this almost could be a common knowledge kind of a thing. The idea that what one eats is important to their health is something that I'm not sure that anybody would argue about. I bet that this paper had many, many pieces of evidence that were really important to the paper's overall argument. And I'm not positive that this is the most useful, i.e. relevant piece of evidence for the students' work on the effects of a vegetarian diet on health issues. So I'm going to move this up, but not very much. And I'm going to keep this kind of in the middle range and say that it probably could use some work in order to find either a clearer piece of evidence and move it up this way, or to set up, give me some more information about the credibility of the source by moving it over here. A second piece of evidence from this same paper is from the Center for Science in the Public Interest, Why Good Nutrition is Important. I know nothing about the center at all. It sounds like a nice organization. It sounds like it could be probably a good website, but without doing a whole lot more research, there's no way that I would know what is happening or what that organization is about. And so in terms of credibility, I think it falls much shorter than the first one that we looked at for this paper. And secondly, the amount that food companies spend on advertising each year, this is a really significant amount of money. This is an interesting stat, but the way it's used in the paper, I have no idea how that is relevant to the title of the paper and to the overall argument of the paper. I can hear many of you saying, oh, but we could use it this way, or but we could use it that way. Yeah, there are many, many ways that you could effectively establish the relevance of the evidence. But just by putting this piece of information in there and forcing the reader, your audience, to make the connections means that you are not doing the work of proving the relevance to your audience, and you have to make sure that you are doing that. So this one, while there is a possibility that both of these are really good, we want to the responsibility is on the student to prove both the credibility and the relevance.